faster than usual. And we're live. Hey, everybody. It's at Doc Foreman. We're back. It's another week. We're at hashtag SPSM. We're really excited that you are here with us tonight. We have someone that I've never really got to talk to looking at her face, so I've known on Twitter for years, since before SPSM. So I'm really thrilled that she's with us tonight. She's also a friend of Dr. Mike Sevilla, who many of you know. He's been a friend of SPSM, and he's an SPSM alum from way back, I believe, to the first season. I know that this is a show where we discuss suicide, where we discuss sometimes really difficult or tricky topics, and we just thought we'd take it to the next level. So this week, we're really excited that Meredith Gould is going to be with us, and we can't wait to introduce her, and we're going to be talking about spirituality and suicide. This is one of those topics that is really important to people who've survived a suicide loss or have survived a suicide attempt, to people who live with suicidal ideation, and not one that we've addressed on the show, I don't think, really hardly at all in years and years, which is, you know, on us. So we're going to be correcting that this week. But before we get into all of that, want to introduce you to our IT producer, Tony Wood. Tony, say hi to the people.
Hello, everybody. At ADWWW, suicidology.org, chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, and COO of Quantify, ourdatahelps.org. Take it away, Chris.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Maxwell. I work for a large national suicide prevention hotline, and I help with some of the SPSM stuff, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm ecstatic to hear what we have to talk about regarding spirituality and how it relates to suicide.
And Chris is genuinely terrified. Go ahead, Meredith.
I'm gonna get a pen. My name is Meredith Gould. I'm a sociologist by training and a working writer and an author. And what pays the mortgage is I'm a consultant about using digital tools to build online communities. I've worked in healthcare and with other faith-based, mission-based communities for years. I started out in print publishing. I started out in advertising in an ad agency, digital, and this is where I've landed. So I'm also a former college professor. Long story. Talk about suicidal ideation, and I realized when digital came along that it was such a great platform for education, that it was an opportunity to reach people so far beyond what we were used to in the classroom or any institution, So that's me. You can ask more questions.
Speaking of classrooms and institutions.
Yeah.
Someone who should be, Dr. Jonathan Singer.
Man, I love that segue, April. That was amazing.
I'm still registered.
There you go. Okay, hi, Jonathan Singer. I'm an associate professor of social work at Loyola University, founder and host of the Social Work Podcast, proud, longtime member of the SPSM community. And I'm coming to you tonight from a hotel room in New York. I'm going to be giving a talk tomorrow at Columbia University around suicide, cyberbullying, and social media. Why
are you at Columbia, Dr. Jonathan Singer?
Because I'm this year's Austin Scholar. Woohoo! Yes, it's good times.
Exciting. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about spirituality and how it connects with suicide. I would really love, Meredith, for you to tell us a little about yourself and how you sort of started linking spirituality and social media together. Some of us have known you for a while on Twitter, especially if you hang out in the HCSM, the HICSM community at all. But for those who don't know you, give an introduction.
Well, the spirituality piece of it is just part of my life. That's threaded in who I am. I mean, the great spiritual questions. And I do make a distinction between religion and spirituality, religion being a social institution. Remember, I'm a sociologist, so I'm always going to frame stuff that way. But that's, a human-created social institution. Spirituality refers more to a way we understand the world around us and our location in the world and our relation to others. I think in the 12-step, he kind of puts it the most succinctly, is knowing that there's something greater than ourselves, and whatever you call that thing. So for some people that is God, for some people that is a God with a name, for some people that is walking in nature, and some people don't want to
Tony
have
walks in
anything.
nature all the time, don't you, Tony?
I could tell. You know, and some people want nothing to do with it, and some people were raised in a formal religion and have left and come back. Some people leave and never come back. Some people, you know, we were talking about in those of us who study or talk about or consort with people in the world in and around church and synagogues, there's this whole notion of SBNR, spiritual but not religious. That was a category that started to emerge in the public conversation about 10 or 15
acronym?
years. And then there were people called the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And in fact, Kaya Oakes, if you follow her on Twitter, she's wonderful. She wrote the book on the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. Lately, I would say in the past 2 or 3 years, social scientists, sociologists, social psychologists are starting to identify people they categorize as the duns, D-O-N-E-S, people who have had, you know, raised in some kind of religious tradition, been very active in church or synagogue or whatever, and then at different parts of their life, they're just done. They're done. Now, in my world, I encounter a lot of duns who also happen to be clergy, so it's very interesting. So for me, I mean, I tell people I have a multiple spirituality disorder because I was raised
Sorry, that was great.
a moment and laugh. I mean, really. So I kind of defy categorization, although I was raised Jewish, and anybody who's raised Jewish is Jewish, and it doesn't really quite matter what else you do along the way, right, Zinger? So very good. So so that's that. So, you know, I had the ashram years, which I say to people, you know, when you're raised Jewish, you have two options, essentially Buddhism and Hinduism. And as far as I was concerned, the food was better in the Hindu route. So there was no way I was going Buddhist, and they were way too quiet. So anyway, so I had my ashram years, and I wandered into and have stayed for quite a long while in Christianity. And that has actually become the community where I do my work. I became I started the Chisocum hashtag in 2011. So it's CHSOCM. It's the church and social media hashtag. And that started, you know, back what's that, 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, or 6 or 7 years ago, 6 years ago, the way people were much more conversational, a lot less combative on Twitter. So that was one of those situations where somebody said, you know, social media seems like a really good idea for community building. Somebody ought to. And so I was the only one who wanted to, really. So I invented the hashtag and started an online community. And that chat community has been meeting regularly since 2011 on a weekly basis. In fact, I got my model for how to do the chat from Dana, because I was also involved with Hicksum, and also Christian Sinclair, because he started HPM chat maybe 6 months before I started Chisocum chat. So we all grew up at the same time before being online community managers were a thing.
Yep.
You know, now it's really a thing where you have to have a skill set and you have to understand small group dynamics. What I tell people, I tell people that whatever happens face to face happens online, only faster. And if you don't, I eventually learn, I see people eventually learn how to read tweets and posts and discern emotional states, moods, all those sorts of things, just from the way somebody's typing, the word choice, their punctuation, whether they're not talking about the all caps thing. I mean, I have one particular friend, and occasionally I'll get something from her that's all lowercase, and I know she's depressed or she's sliding into depression because I've known her for so long that I can tell from her typing and her punctuation. So, you know, over the years, there are a lot of us who started out in doing community, creating online communities, have learned it along the way. And then some of us have gone on to other people. That's kind of what I'm up to these days, is helping to train other people how to use, you know, what are the best practices for creating and building and managing an online community, especially because of all the sensitivities. But primarily now, in fact, I was just telling a friend of mine, a pastor friend of mine the other day, I said, you know, this is me. I live at the margins, and I work on the bridge, and I try not to jump off the bridge, but I'm a bridge person. So I'm always bridging.
Please somebody meme that. Sorry, I'm just putting out a call to the people who are listening. I live on the margins and I work on the bridge, and I'm kind of a bridge person. Come on.
I don't jump off it. Now, no, I got all my safety nets in place, which social media is great for, by the way, safety nets. But I'm able to move between several worlds. So this is a very long-winded answer to, I was working in healthcare for many, many, many years. And while this other life is going on at the same time. And I realized, wow, I mean, nobody's talking about this stuff. I've worked in and around, and I myself have a long-term chronic illness that, you know, I'm with the hashtag Spoonie crowd. I've gotten very involved with patient engagement, some of the, you know, e-patient empowered patient communities, and nobody was talking about their spiritual lives. I mean, nobody was talking about
we've done
the impact. But I'm just giving you the history. So that's how I got interested in it. That's how I started to push for it. You know, so that's that. And I know I told you, and I think I communicated this with everyone else, that I do have, you know, a personal history with suicide. And so that it was my mother's hobby for many years. And she was never successful at it. And and she may well be at some point. So I grew up with that. And I've also worked hospice. So I'm very life a long time. And it's something I'm interested in, and anything I can do to help people feel more comfortable or create a safe space to talk about what's going on for them, their deepest fears, their deepest hopes, their deepest wishes, and to do that in a safe place. I'm all for that. And I absolutely believe, and I know from my own experience in terms of community management, that social media doing that. And where it breaks down is that people just don't know how to use the tools in a way to create that safety for people.
You were talking in our notes getting ready for this, and you know, we were doing the warm up, and this is something I think that some of us get education about in school and some of us don't, or education in life, the difference between religion and spirituality. And we'll probably talk about both, but they're really different things. And could you really briefly, for the folks following along, tell us the difference?
Can I just make people buy my book?
You can absolutely show them your book. Jonathan.
Self-promotion. No, okay. So actually in this book, what I did in the first section, you know, I end up doing this in every single book I write. Well, that's nice. Okay, let's all show our books. Okay. Yeah, what I end up doing in almost every single book I write is starting out giving a basic sociology course, because we seem to have at least 2 generations of people who never took it or not what they learned. So religion is a social institution. It is a human creation to organize concepts the numinous, the unexplainable, and to organize belief, to categorize and organize belief. If you talk to theologians, and I'll say this now for my theologian friends who might be listening, or my clergy friends, do not start trolling me on Twitter. We can talk about this later, but that's not a definition that's very comforting or comfortable for theologians, biblical scholars, or people in what I call the religion business. But sociologically speaking, a religion is a social institution for organizing beliefs, values, attitudes about belief, okay? Whereas spirituality, so you agree, so Jonathan's nodding his head. Would you like to add to that?
Whether I agree or not, like, I think it's a distinction that most people get. And when I talk with folks, definitely people are very, I love talking to people about their faith or their spirituality or both. It's not a conversation that I necessarily shy away from having. I don't talk about my own or myself hardly at all. But I will tell you, you know, people often do want to tell you about what's going on with that, especially in the when I'm finally talking to somebody and they're thinking about ending their life.
Right.
Singer, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think this distinction between spirituality and religion, and understanding what's different about sort of relationship with God or the spiritual, is as important for people within religious communities as it is for people who do not identify with any particular religious community. And I think this is something, when we work with folks who are suicidal and they're struggling with the human side, which I think of as religion, that it can be really important to help to distinguish those things, because if they do find strength in these ideas of higher power or omniscient being or anything like that, that can be distinct from the inevitable politics and drama associated with any human institution.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the challenge. I'm not a clinician, but I think that's one of the challenges for some of my best friends are. So I think that's the challenge for clinicians, is how to, and we did talk about this before we started formally, that the challenge is, what language system do you use so that we can invite people into what for some is a very scary conversation, and get to talk about it, and it's a very intimate conversation. So what language system, what language do we use that gives someone fully permission to say, I love my church, or to say, I'm Shomer Shabbat, you know, and not have somebody say, you're nuts. And at the same time, for someone to say, I hate my church, I hate everything to do with it, I almost died because of them, and I want to kill myself now because of them. I mean, because of what they did to me, you know. So, you know, how do you create that freedom to say, okay, so maybe how do we, let's talk about the institution and your feelings and your frustrations and your hurts and your disappointments with the institution, and how might you separate that from what you understand about yourself as a being in the world and your life now embodied, and what might happen after you die. See, because religion deals with, I mean, before it became a social institution, what theology and religion has always dealt with are those core existential questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What happens when I die? And religion has provided the answer to that. And depending on the religion, the answer could be, well, when you die, you for sure are going to hell. Or the reason for being here, and I think about in Judaism, you're here, you know, our reason for being here is to leave the world a better place than we showed up. We are here to help repair the world. You know, that's what we're here to do. That is an ethos in Judaism. Okay. And so that whole question, I think that's one way you can get into the spiritual aspects and bracket the religion by focusing on those 3 core questions. Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? What happens after I die?
And those are questions that when someone is thinking about suicide, especially if someone has chronic feelings about suicide like all their lives, like they think about those things all the time. And what I think is really interesting is that there was a lot of the therapy practices that we use with folks who are thinking about suicide. And we talk about what is a life worth living, not even what is a good life, just what is a life worth living. We talk. I saw somebody showing a wonderful screenshot about you talking about willingness, and we talk about willingness in DBT. We talk about radical acceptance. Zen Buddhism is built into some of our best therapies for folks at high risk of suicide. And we often don't discuss that, and don't discuss how people are creating meaning and using their communication to sort of tell you what that's about. I'm going to check in with Zing because his face has had about 5 things to say.
That all?
I saw his eyebrows.
I saw more.
No, I was just let's see. There were things keep going by that I'm thinking about. But I think that these fundamental questions that you asked, Meredith, that religion addresses, I think that this idea of connectedness that we talk about in suicide prevention, this idea of belonging, that these are really at the core. And since the folks that come in for mental health services, the vast majority of them identify some sort of spiritual or religious affiliation. We really do a disservice when we fail to assess what those are in their lives. What does it mean for them? I work with kids primarily, which means I work with families and parents. And research project that I did, parents spontaneously, because I wasn't asking the question, but they spontaneously told me that their experience of going through crisis services with their suicidal kid was completely consistent with their religious view, with their spiritual beliefs. And this I found to be a really interesting finding, because there is this sense of perhaps conflict with religion, spirituality, and maybe say the medical model, right? There's some folks who are saying, well, if you sort of give your faith over to the doctor, then you're not giving your faith over to God. You're not trusting that process. But all of these parents said, the reason why I know it's okay for my kid to do this thing that I'm not familiar with or I don't have personal experience with is because I know that this is the path God wants me to take. This is consistent with my view of the world. And I thought that was a really interesting intersection of religious belief and spirituality. There was one parent who said, I'm Catholic, but I will never go to church because the Bible says that, I pray in God's house or something like, I don't know the exact line. And he's like, that's not what the Catholic Church is. It's somebody else's house. I can pray to God in my own house. And so he was very clear on the distinction between his personal relationship with God and the institution. But I do think this is something that we're afraid of to talk. We're afraid to talk about as clinicians, and we don't have much training. And the last thing that I'll say about this is I think that one of the reasons why we hesitate from talking about this is because regardless of your own religious belief, what happens if somebody actually has some sort of spiritual awakening or has a theological question that you don't feel prepared to address as a clinician, especially during a suicidal crisis when everything is so important, right? There's this heightened sense of importance. And so I think that that's one of the challenges that comes up for folks.
So tell us what you do. What do you do, Zing, in that moment?
Well, so I've come to buddies. I hope you have clergy buddies.
Well, then, so that's, I've come
people spits on them. It's not true.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I do. I hate lots of people. I'm a hater. You can hear it in my voice right now. Hate.
I can tell from
Hate.
just looking at you,
It's true.
actually.
But no, but I've learned that it's I've learned my lesson that it's important to say these are questions that you should really talk about with your pastor or your minister, or go to your youth group leader, or to really address these, because as I've said for a long time, I think one of the ways that we will really address suicide prevention is getting it outside of behavioral health, mental health.
Well, and that door swings both ways, because I work with a lot of clergy, and I work across denominations. And it's fascinating because on the list of things I'm threatening to write, I do go on about this sometimes on Twitter, is in public, but definitely in the back channel, is that clergy are not trained clinicians. Your semester in seminary learning pastoral care quit for you to provide any kind of clinical support to somebody, at any level. I mean, even like mild anxiety disorder, and so I'm always saying to clergy, this is not what you're trained to do. Please know people in your community, the professional alliances with other colleagues, so that when you have a congregant come in, say, we can talk about this, but I urge you to connect with this other person, medication, maybe talk about a little therapy. And it is just not my skill set. Let us pray. But so that goes both ways, so that the clinician who's able to say, let's, in a hospital setting, who could say, would you be comfortable calling in the chaplain's office? Or should we make an appointment?
I'll have them dial in their, like if they're saying, like if we're in the middle, I will say I've had a lot of patients put their minister, their pastor on their safety plans. Yep. And have their phone number. And if they're going to be part of, for example, means restriction, like the pastor's going to like hang on to the gun, for example, or no, well, that's,
no,
that's
I know
what we do. And in Louisiana, like there are a lot of pastors who know exactly how to do that well. And so, because a lot of folks are gun owners here. So we definitely involve them in safety planning and have dialed them into the session with the patient's consent to talk about what's happening. And I have people that part of their coping plan is, I'm going to go to my Bible study or my faith community, or I'm going to pray. Like these are things that people do to deal with pain, to deal with suffering, and to add a layer of meaning that allows them to tolerate things that are really intensely painful but transitory, and in the service of what very, very higher sort of order life goals or beliefs. And we always want to engage those. Mm-hmm. And then of course I always use the, if you're not sure about the answer to this, we could just not kill ourselves this week while we work on that.
Yeah, that's a great, yeah. There are two things I wanted to address. One is the whole thing about spiritual practices. What are spiritual practices? But before I do that, if I get to it, I do want to make this point, and this is because we started out talking a little about, my interest in digital and digital communications and digital support and community using social media tools. One of my favorite moving stories about this sort of thing, well, two of them, but one in particular, and this is going back probably, I got involved with Twitter in 2008. So I would say somewhere in 2008 or 2009, it was the first time I saw a suicide intervention play out on Twitter. Now that's very early, okay? And I watched someone talking about it online, and then someone contacting me back channel to say, are you seeing this? I'm going to make a phone call, keep talking, chatted with this person, and over the course of an hour, someone in another state who was in the same denomination I give myself chills when I tell this story, got in a car, drove 2 states over, got this person, took that person to their house until they could get them into a safer place with some kind of clinical support. I saw it all play out on Twitter. And it was one of those moments in which I understood the power of digital for real-time support. And the person who was suicidal, people who were involved with it were able to stay. It was almost like you did an after intervention debrief. People were able to stay and go, what just happened? It was also very interesting for me to see. Now, remember, this is going back a chunk of time. It's very interesting for me and this is how I got interested in what I call the trajectory of engagement. When does Twitter and engaging with someone on Twitter, when does that move to email and phone? When does that become in person, and vice versa? Where do you meet someone in person and say, hey, do you use Twitter? Do you use Facebook? Would you like to connect there? How do those relationships build? And again, in the beginning, a lot of people were, well, I don't want to be on Twitter because I don't care about people's lunch. Favorite example, when I did a lot of trainings years ago, I was like, I don't want to know what somebody had for lunch. And I would say, oh, really? Do you work in an office? And oh, yeah, we work in an office. Okay, so what happens around 11:30? Don't you start wandering around to cubicles finding out what anybody's having for lunch? How is this any different? But again, that's going back to 2008, 2009, where people were saying, what is this thing? Why should we bother? And it's a whole different scene now. It really is. And I'm grateful for that.
I want to give you a really quick quote from Karis with a K, Karis Myrick. So spirituality is warm and fuzzy. When times are hard, it's cold and distant. Suicide prevention is about finding the warm, the fuzzy with support.
I see that. When times are hard, it's cold and distant.
I just thought that was well put.
Yeah, that is. Well, yeah, and warm and fuzzy. Yeah, that's the safe place. Like, where do you feel safe? Where do you feel like you're wrapped up in that bundling, safe bundling, which brings me to the spiritual practices. Now, one of the things I did in that Desperately Seeking Spirituality book, again, this is like, well, how did I get into this? And I say, it's just part of my story. It's part of my whole journey. And that book started, I got interested in that book, writing that book, because I realized that after years of doing very traditional spiritual practices, again, across religions, interfaith and ecumenical. So all these practices stopped working for me. I mean, the happiest day of my life was when somebody found all the letters from Mother Teresa saying that she hadn't believed in God for 30 years. I was like, woohoo, yay, Mother Teresa, 30 years, fabulous. I didn't run around at the time declaring my joy, but I sure felt it. So it was very comforting for me, because I thought, wow, this is Mother Teresa. And, there's the desert and spiritual teachers, the wisdom teachers talk about that, blah, blah, blah. But it's one thing to talk about and read about it and go from having a very robust spiritual life to feeling like, what happened? I feel nothing. I feel nothing. And I'll tell you, in terms of, and again, I don't know the data, you folks know the data, but I would be very interested to know what percentage of highly religious people with very, very robust and perhaps even rigid spiritual practices, when those stop, when they no longer feel that, how many start to feel suicidal because that has been their anchor to meaning? What do you have?
I don't know that literature as well, actually, and I'm kind of feeling embarrassed. Zing?
No, I don't know that literature, and I don't know that there's very good data on that. I think Yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Because I looked a couple of years ago when I was doing this study with the parents who were talking about their
Mhm.
suicidal kids, not because they themselves were suicidal, but I just looked for anything, and it was really challenging to find anything that was that I could hang my hat on.
Well, I think we do have to, and I don't know. I mean, I haven't done, you know, of research. I do know how to use Google. I might go look it up. I do know that there is data on clinical depression and the correlation between loss of faith, loss of religious structure, and community. There's got to be that data. But anyway.
But I'm going to just go ahead and be open and speak about my own experience, which is,
Okay.
you know, having to decide to leave my faith community for what I felt were reasons of integrity and like doing what I knew was the right thing, and doing it for an excellent reason. It's not. I'm not going to go into that. I know. Well, yodeling pickle, but I'm not going to do that. I will tell you that the first couple of years following that were by far the worst, hardest years of my life in terms of my mental health. It's a time I remember, like, I don't know if I could say that I was clinically depressed, but the lowest I have ever felt, having really struggling with my identity. Especially there are some religions that people belong to that really inform them sort of culturally, and inform a whole bunch of things about how they go about their day. And if you leave, or if you are made to leave, which was not my situation, but I have friends for whom that was their situation, deeply isolating. For me, it meant an entirely different relationship with most people in my family, and it meant the loss of the majority of my friends. Or at least a really huge change in how close we were going to be. And it meant that I wasn't really sure what my life was about or how I was going to live it. And so that was, I mean, you do use your culture, you use your friends, you use your rituals, you use your routine, you use meaning to get you through things, or to help things sort of make sense and sort of keep you oriented. And it's painful and it's disorienting if your faith changes, if you leave your faith, if the end of the story is things got so much better for me. But and Zing and I've talked about this, and Tony and I have talked about this, I think, at length. Sorry, Chris. We're gonna have to check with you in a minute. But I'm gonna say, like, it's given me a deep sensitivity to how impactful those kinds of things, these meaning-making kinds of structures in people's lives, how they're going to impact people's depression, how they're going to impact the way that they're looking at the problems that they're facing in their life. And I will say, one of the reasons that I really have found social media valuable, because this was happening. I mean, I was involved with Hickson Chat as all of these things were happening, and I found out that there wasn't a client I could get, that there wasn't somebody from their faith community in the very specific way that person lived it, that I couldn't find in social media, and who would answer questions for me and help me understand how this was going to impact somebody's identity, or if it, like what that culture was about, so I could sort of contextualize what this person was trying to tell me. And I found all of that incredibly valuable and very, very human. And it's been something I am much more compassionate about now than 15 years ago.
Well, and it's just yesterday morning, I was in an intentional community for many years. And when I left that community, and again, for good reasons, didn't get kicked out, left voluntarily, was still affiliated with them. And this is now going on years, maybe even 20 years. I'm really bad at time. I dream about that community. I dream about the people in it. And yesterday morning, I woke up from a dream, and I'm a lucid dreamer, so lucky me. So I woke up the other morning, and I was feeling the joy of being with those, I'm going to cry, the joy of being with those people, and the grief of not having them now, because I thought I'd always be in that community. And I spent some time thinking and feeling, I will be dreaming about this community for the rest of my life. because they're part of who I am. And they were part of my identity. So, and actually, this was my project during my 50s, was I called the 50s pulling together the shards of self, looking at all the different ways I had split off these different identities, spiritual, and also music and art and writing and, business and all that. And they were all in different compartments. And I really spent, from age 50 through probably 58, saying, how do I integrate these? How do I become a whole person? What is the project of becoming a whole person? And what that, and also, again, coming out of a family with a suicidal and actively suicidal mother, where who had a wonderful life, very talented, very creative, very beautiful, very funny, very smart, and desperately wanted to die. And hasn't that I know of, but, and so it's interesting. So I spent most of my time in my 40s learning that my mother's suicidal behavior was not genomic. It wasn't my legacy, genomic legacy, nor was it my psychological legacy. And then I spent my 50s understanding ways I had reproduced some of the conditions that would have led to my own suicide, my own successful suicide. And again, I was just telling this to a pastor friend of mine a couple of days ago. I said, and amazingly, when I stopped, I've been in recovery for coming up on 24 years. I said, amazingly, who knew, when I and I'm saying that completely ironically and sarcastically, but when I stopped self-medicating, I was no longer clinically depressed, and I no longer wanted to kill myself. It just was no longer an option. Was it because I had this transcendent moment of realizing I had something to live for? No, actually not. Polar, and there was support there. And then looping back, I started to see that it wasn't about praying the liturgy of the hours. It wasn't about making sure I walked a labyrinth every week. It wasn't about sitting in meditation, which PS tweeted out, I hate that stuff. It wasn't about, I'm too, look, I'm moving around. I'm kinetic. I can't, I can't do that. Don't want to. I'll make soup. Making soup is my meditation.
I'll come watch you meditate anytime.
Then I'll hand you a spoon. So I started to look at that, and so before I worked on this book, I said, okay, so all these spiritual practices are oriented towards doing something to become more spiritual or to enter into a spiritual space. So I said, what if we flip that around and talk about the practices of being? What if we start with the fruits of the practice and what we wish to become, who we wish to be, the beings we want to be, practice that. So I said, okay, so here are the core practices of being I came up with. Willingness, curiosity, which is my favorite practice, empathy, and I'm not compassion, empathy. You cannot have compassion until you have empathy, and you probably can't have that until you have sympathy. So I had to unpack all that. Generosity, and then delight. And I thought, what if we practice those as our spiritual practices? So in my personal life, I bounce between, especially these days in the current environment, and my major spiritual practice right now, my two spiritual practices now are curiosity and generosity. The way I practice curiosity is I look at what's going on in the Twitter stream and all this other stuff, and it's basically, what the is going on? Oh, what's that? What's that about? My life. Me, how does it affect my relationships? I'm curious about that. And that keeps me from getting enraged. Instead of getting enraged and depressed, I choose curiosity. And then instead of getting in, and I have not mastered this. I mean, you can see my tweets during the day. I have not mastered this. But the other thing, instead of turning into a troll myself and getting enraged and furious, how can I be a more generous person?
I want to read to you a quote, and this is and I can't believe Meredith, we're 45 minutes through the hour, just so that you know. Marsha Epstein tweets out, a dad told me the worst thing for his wife was not his son's death from suicide, but the pastor saying that the son is not in heaven.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay, yeah.
And some of the folks are talking about, so what if your source of pain is your religious community? What are your options? And I'd like to run this by the panel, but I would say one of the things that I love about social media is that you can often find people from your same religious cultural tradition that might see things in a way that alleviates your suffering, that is also harmonious with your religious and spiritual beliefs. And just because, pastors, people are just mortal and they're just imperfect. And one of the things that I've loved about social media is that you can find the people like you who are really like you and who are maybe even just that step beyond, who are really supportive without having to worry about being a heretic. So you don't even have to necessarily leave your faith tradition, although you can do that. And I think that's so that the people, the faith community that you're geographically located aren't the entire world of your religion or your spirituality, which I think is pretty great.
And that's the beauty of social media. That's the beauty of social media. Now, Twitter is more public. What I love about Facebook is, and I recommend this for churches a lot, I say stop being so fixated on your Facebook page. Start to learn how to use groups. So if you create a secret group, which is so locked down, there's a difference between an open group and a closed group and a secret group, the way you can maintain privacy and protect all that. I said I'm always telling leader utilizing the secret and the closed group for at-risk populations who, people, the suicide support group or the survivors of suicide group who are so exhausted and so upset and perhaps feeling such shame they are not going to come to your church and sit around eating crappy cookies. They will, however, closed or secret group where they know everybody in it and feel safe and share there. And so that's social media. And I'm very fortunate to be in community with many, many wonderful clergy. And I've seen clergy just bluntly go online and say to people, get another church. If your pastor's telling you that you're going to go to hell, you need to go to a different church and actually don't care that your grandparents donated the candlesticks for the altar. Get out of that church because you deserve support.
Karis is saying it's really hard when one's spirituality is ignored because of fear, and I'm assuming like providers fear that it will increase your symptoms or will lead to suicide. That if people are spiritual, they might get sicker. And I was almost flabbergasted by that because that's not my way of being when I'm in the room. But I can guess it probably does happen. Zing, do you have any reaction to that?
Is that in the stream? I'll look for it.
Yeah, it's in the stream.
Okay.
I mean, I think, my reaction is to think about it sort of along the lines of what we were talking about before in terms of like, provider education, acknowledgement that there are some blind spots, but also recognizing that, in all areas, having this collaboration between folks who are trained in specific religious traditions, who feel comfortable going down that road, is just like people who are trained in working with folks who are suicidal or having emotional behavioral problems and are comfortable going down that road. Part of it is I'm comfortable, and therefore you have you trust me as a provider. You trust me as somebody that can help you in this moment. And one of the things that we did in Philadelphia was we talked about having chaplains come to the emergency department instead of they weren't doing that before. If somebody requested them, they would come, but having them there as part of crisis intervention. And Joseph Goldman, who's a rabbi in Philadelphia, was able to do that as part of his sort of clergy training, and it was really an amazing experience, and I think very powerful. So you might have providers, might have had psychiatrists in the emergency department who were very dismissive, but then there was somebody there who was very understanding and accepting while somebody was in their crisis.
Yeah.
Sal, just you asked about research. I will want to let you guys know. Everybody, give a shout out to Sally Spencer Thomas, who has been traveling back from the Zero Suicide Summit in Australia. I think she's got like some sort of 36-hour travel schedule because there was a delay.
Lord.
And she is tweeting out resources about spiritual communities and suicide prevention, and several from the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. You guys all remember SPSM alum Jerry Reed. So Meredith, good news. The links to some of the resources on this will be in the Twitter stream. Thank you, Sally, for the help out.
Oh, that's great. That's good.
Go ahead, Meredith. I think catch off.
Do you pull a Storify or do you use Simpler for transcript?
I will make a store file, have all the stuff in it.
Okay. All right.
I know, and the video. It'll pop right up. You'll love it.
The video. Great. Yeah, I just, there's so many resources we don't, I know what I want to make. You know, I was also very in, at the end of the 80s and the early 90s, the whole spiritual emergence and the whole spiritual emergency stuff, which is like a whole other topic, but just as a headline, there's some percentage of people who seem suicidal and they're really in some form of spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. And it's usually tied to screwing around. That's a technical term. Screwing around with a spiritual practice that they shouldn't be screwing around with without a teacher. You know, so somebody who says, oh, I'm going to get into meditation. I'm going to sit there for 45 minutes, like every other hour and meditate. Like, don't do that. You know, it's like, do not do that without adult supervision.
There's a Buddhist monk in Baton Rouge who's also getting his PhD in clinical psychology, and he's a delight. And I will mention him when I talk about PTSD and meditation and mindfulness. I'm like, hey, listen, if you've never done this, it helps. He has a service particularly that is not really religious in any way. It's just really to show you how mindfulness and meditation works. And it's in English, not Vietnamese. It'll be great. And I'm like, listen, you got to go. And people of many different religious beliefs that are interested in mindfulness and meditation go and bring students just, you know, for that. And I will say, teacher does help. Anyway.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing too is that every spiritual tradition, the formal practices go across all spiritual traditions. You can find, like, what's called mantra meditation in the Eastern tradition is called the Rosary by Catholics. Okay? You can find basically the similar practice as a formal practice, the practice of praying at certain times of the day. You find that in every formal tradition, certainly in the Orthodox, in an Orthodox practice, or orthopraxis, in every religion, whether it's 6 times a day, 4 times a day, or 5 times a day, you find that in every religious tradition. So the other thing that people do, I have no idea what this has to do with suicide prevention, but I think the other thing that people do is sometimes flee their own tradition without fully exploring what's available to them in it, you know? So I'm saying this, both sides of the same coin. If your tradition isn't supporting your mental health and emotional well-being and ease of being coming at you, like you're going to hell and all that stuff, get out of there. Don't assume that there's nothing available to you in your tradition. You know, a lot of people say, I don't like my tradition, it's too cerebral. Well, news for you, your so-called cerebral tradition has a whole mystical part. You just haven't discovered it yet, you know? So, but again, when somebody's in crisis, when somebody's in, you know, a deep depression or suicidal, that's not the time to be talking theology. It's really the time to say,
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't, you know, again, I'm not a clinician, but I'm fine with people saying to me, how do you envision your death? You know,
I
what do
don't
you think
usually
death
lead
looks
with
like?
that one.
Huh?
I don't usually lead with that one.
No, not at all. But
But I do. But Tony will tell you, I often think about that, like mortality and sort of living my life with the idea, but it's an entire pattern in mind. But like, I think you don't run across every day people are really, really comfortable with a large and sort of subtle lexicon of spirituality. And Maxwell, I want to get a comment in for you before we go to final thoughts, because you tweeted out something that was very profound. You said, we are often using the language of spirituality because we don't have a good clinical language. We're trying to sort of get at these profound things about the human experience. And you said it better. Can you expand on that? It was really quite good.
No, and kind of what I was hearing a lot of is that spirituality serves a function in helping to explain some of the commonalities that we experience as humans, and religion puts that into a sort of language that we can then use to communicate those shared experiences. And the kind of analog that I was making with the analogy I was trying to make with suicide is that suicide is something that everybody experiences. We all come in contact with it, whether it's personal or otherwise. But we don't really have a language for suicide. We don't really necessarily have something that we all kind of understand and can interpret and internalize. So earlier in the conversation, when we were talking about that anxiety that comes up with clinicians specifically, when suicide is brought up, and then, oh God, pair it with spirituality or religion, it's a nightmare for the clinician, right? Because we don't have necessarily a language that can help us internalize what they're feeling. Empathy does okay, but still, it's nothing like sharing something like a religion or a spirituality connection. And so we use things that get pretty close. And I think lived experience is where we can get a lot of the lived experience. Might be our Rosetta Stone when it comes to looking at that shared experience, really listening to the people who have been through these things. And these can be our people who can do a lot of work with this. So I was just trying to take a lot of this experience that we have with spirituality and religion, and translate it into a way that we might be thinking about suicide and how we can communicate that effectively.
Not to mention, which I will now go ahead and mention, but not to mention that those among us who have either not done the work or in the process of doing our own spiritual work and are a little, spiritually verklempt, so you have a clinician raising issues of spiritual, and then, the client leaves and the clinician's like, I can't take another moment of embodiment. It's
kids.
I love when I make
that never happened.
Like this.
I think that we've only got about a minute left, actually. These hours, can you believe how fast they fly, Meredith? It's amazing to us. Every week I look up and we've only got 10 minutes. You have a new book coming out.
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Why don't you tell folks about it real quick, and we will do final thoughts.
No. Actually,
I didn't see it. That was too quick.
My dearly beloved friend Mike Sevilla just tweeted out the cover. It's called Deliberate Acts of Kindness, a Field Guide to Service as a Spiritual Practice. And actually, in this book, I make the point in the beginning that in every single spiritual tradition and in all religions, the definition of attainment, like you have, like you're like an avatar, you know, the attainment is when you are able to reach out and serve others. You know, that is a marker of spiritual maturity. I write about that, and then it's essentially a tips book helping people. It's got discernment exercises, and it's got questions, and it's got tips saying, okay, how do you discern a call to, how do you know where to serve? How do you discover where to serve? And then what do you do to get involved? And then my favorite chapter, which actually I think you'll like, my favorite chapter is called The Shadow Side of Service, which is all the really icky stuff that happens when you think, oh, look at me, I'm just being a blessing and a contribution to community, and God, I hate this community so much.
Or
You know?
I would say,
These
like,
are not nice people. I hate these people.
when you're serving, so you don't have to think about some things that you need to take care of on your own. And
Right, where it gets all triggered. You know, it's like, oh, look at me, I'm just being so generous. Oh my Lord, I'm triggered. I'm now in therapy 3 times a week and on extra meds. So I like the, you know, that shadow side, the shadow side of service stuff. So that book, it's actually going to be available for pre-order this week. I'm going to start putting that up on Facebook and Twitter. It's my birthday. It's my birthday book. So, so all is good. I'm excited.
so
I'm
Meredith,
actually very happy. Despite the what I think is so astonishing is that I'm very much aware of feeling happy these days. I get onto Twitter and I feel like I'm going to blow a blood vessel in my brain when I read most of this stuff. And at the same time, I feel like there's such, I'm meeting a lot of new and different people on Twitter outside of my usual, because the blessing of this time is that people who have never thought about being politically active or becoming politically active, people who've never even thought about proper sentence structure are now thinking about proper sentence structure. And I love that. I'm like, let's grow. Let's all grow. Okay. Who's in it? You know?
As a final thought, let's all grow. I like that. I'm gonna go down the line, but that's a good note to end on. Chris Maxwell, final thoughts.
Oh God, it has been an hour, really, really fast hour.
Yeah,
And the Twitter feed has been going like just. So no, Meredith, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear your thoughts and to hear your expertise. I mean, to be able to put this into words and to see how you have the development of the communities that you've created, and to be able to hear you explain, seeing that need, connecting it to what you have experience in and expertise in, and then to make it happen. It's just been it's been a pleasure. So I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Dr. Jonathan Singer.
Yeah, you know, I think that just like people are afraid to talk about suicide, folks are afraid to talk about these bigger questions of the meaning of life, because I don't think that there are hard and fast answers. And I think that unless you are trained in kind of a relational psychodynamic approach, hanging out in the unknown is a little scary. And a lot of times folks don't need to hang out in the unknown, right? That can be problematic too, you know, kind of like the shadow side of service. But I think that this is a really important conversation that we don't have enough of in any aspect of mental health. And so I'm super glad that Meredith, you were here, and that April, that you facilitated this, that we could continue this, or to have this conversation. I look forward to it continuing with folks like Robert Vore and all these folks that are participating in the SPSM chat. So thank you.
Very cool.
Tony Wood, final thoughts. I think I surprised him.
Taking a nap.
I surprised him.
Tony.
We love you, Jonathan Singer, but Meredith, you're our new favorite.
Oh, you say that to everyone every week. Okay,
No.
I'll take it. Thank you. I believe
No, I don't,
you.
but I'm going to start.
Tony!
So we've got a couple minutes over. We're so glad that you're with you. My final thought is, in a lot of ways, so when you are often at those points of being suicidal, there's often great disconnect with others. You often, I mean, that's sort of, that withdrawal is sort of one of those things. Spirituality and social media, and sometimes combined together, are wonderful things that are about connection with something that is bigger than yourself and something that can help you have meaning and tolerate sometimes a great deal of pain. If you have been using social media to access things that help you with your spirituality, and especially that help you with your mental health and well-being, several of you have been tweeting those out. My final thought is, spend the next 10 or 15 minutes, if we didn't get to it in the chat, and tweet us what you think works for you or resources that you think might be helpful for others. And please do have a fabulous week this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about the issues with algorithms, and there's going to be some neat stuff. And we've got Robert Morris from Coco coming on the week after that. So we're going to be sort of back to data science. But remember, in the end, the reason most of us are doing suicide prevention is this sort of deep compassion for human pain and suffering, and to alleviate it, which at its very, very core is a spiritual mission. And we are so glad, Meredith, that you're with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.